You don't know what you don't know. And that's one of the biggest challenges that startups and entrepreneurs face. How can you prepare for something when you're not sure what to watch out for? In this episode, I'm bringing the show the fabulous Anna Dick to start answering some of these questions. We will look at what startups need to bear in mind as they are getting ready for SaaS customers and investors. Anna is a fractional CTO and coach at Dixie Tech Consulting. Working in tech for over 20 years, Anna has a proven track record of transforming and growing tech teams and businesses in a digital landscape across many, many sectors. She's an outcome focused CTO, tech leader, and coach with particular strength in tech and digital strategy and product development. Anna is highly experienced in translating this to non-tech stakeholders, including founders and investors. And as you know, for those who have been following us for a while, it's not just about understanding tech, but it's also about being able to share this information to those who might not grasp it. Welcome to the Mary Poppins of Startups live show. I'm Naily Makangu from Athena Leaders. As a tech consultant and startup advisor, I will answer live the burning questions you have on your journey to Series A+. Subscribe and tune in every week for top tips to meet amazing guests, startup founders, investors, and more. More importantly, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Anna, welcome to the Mary Poppins of Startups live show. I'm really excited to have you on the show. But first, for those who might not have had the pleasure of getting to know you, can you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, of course. Well, hello, and thanks for having me. I've been excited about joining you on this podcast for a while. I know we talked about it. It seems like ages ago now. So yeah, you gave me a great little intro there. I have been working in tech probably for around 20 years, mainly around product development. The last probably 10 years, mainly in startup and scale up world, working very closely with founders in terms of how they can build and scale out their tech products. My very early career, I was a webmaster. So I started off actually building out static websites for customers, got into tech leadership and management through that. But I'd probably say I'm an overall technologist. I've done so many of the different roles. I was an IT manager. I've done desktop support. I looked after infrastructure. I've looked after security, development, testing. I've even tried a little bit of design in my past. So I think when you get to the point of potentially being a CTO, to have a really good understanding of all of those different disciplines and to have done some of those roles has been really advantageous as well. Now I do fractional work, and I've got a number of great customers that are startups, mainly pre-seed, early stage startups. But then I also do coaching and mentoring as well on the side.
Yes. And I can imagine how the wealth of knowledge that you bring just by having been everywhere and having worked on so many different challenges can be very beneficial, especially to pre-seeds and early stage startups. Now, I guess when you meet the new startups, what are the kind of things that you see in organization that make you feel like, they really need to work with me and I can really make a difference here?
I think part of it can be having gone very quickly into starting to build something. You know, from a kind of quite a technical role, I seem to spend quite a lot of my time convincing people not to build stuff or to rethink and really try and understand more of the product development side, I guess, rather than the pure kind of product build. Like, what are you building? Who are you building it for? You know, and then look at what's the cheapest incremental way that you can prove out and get that value proposition before going full steam ahead and planning out, you know, a big product build without incrementally testing and learning first. I think when I first started working with startups, I'd obviously heard about the lean startup book when I was working at corporations, the BBC and Co-op years ago. They were starting to use those techniques in a big organization. And I think when I then left that corporate world and went to work with startups, I think I presumed that all founders would have read the lean startup book or would have, you know, had an understanding of that. But I think, you know, some of that mindset around how you build out your tech products in quite a lean way to make sure that you're building something out that's commercially viable along the way, with just that right amount of finesse as well. So not over-engineering anything too soon, but also making sure that you've got that commercial edge so that you're building out, for your real user needs as well.
And it's funny how you started by saying that, especially coming from a tech background, you're really stopping people to actually go into full let's build and start coding, which is, this is very true. It's one of the issues that I see a lot in the startup world as well. But I guess one thing that's interesting for people who might not know, do you feel like this happens a lot more, or it's maybe it's a 50-50, but it's something that happens a lot more when you look at working with technical founders, because they do have the ability to go and code, and so they might kind of want to stay a bit more in the comfort zone rather than going out and speak to customers.
Yeah, I think they're definitely, I think it's both sides. I think from technical founders, they often want to start building something out straight away, especially if they've come maybe from an engineering background. There's a tendency to be more of a perfectionist and struggle with the whole lean side, just build enough to test something perspective. But then you've also got non-technical founders who, not understanding how products can be built, want it all, or think that they need it all at the start. So maybe when they're engaging with a partner or starting to build out a tech team, that whole idea of a minimum viable product type piece can be quite hard for some new founders to grasp, because they feel like they want everything. They've got a big idea about what maybe they want from their experiences, but actually taking that time to really understand the user needs, that whole kind of research and discovery type phase can often be missed, and you go straight into building something that on the whole might be what the customers need or want. But I think what you often find is that you're either validating some of those assumptions, or you're kind of proving that they're wrong, and you need to pivot a little bit in terms of the actual product that you need to build.
Yeah, definitely. Yesterday I was doing a coaching session, mentoring session with a startup, and it pretty much everything that you're saying now really resonates with me. And I think I might just get her to look at this video and just pick up even more of your advice, because she's at a position where she's got the platform, and actually we're talking way beyond MVP, yet she doesn't really know what the value proposition is, how it's going to land to the clients. And I struggle to get her to even articulate who she's building it for, right? So if you've got something that's way past MVP and you're not really sure whether you're going for a B2C or a B2B, a mixture of the two, it shows that there are some fundamental of testing the idea that have been missed, and she's moved ahead with the platform. So there's kind of a lot of, right, I know where you are now, we need to rein that back in a little bit. Now, you talked a bit about the lean startups and MVP and all of those principles. So for those who are listening to us, they might be first-time founders, whether technical or not, and they are wondering, what are some strategies that I can put in place to kind of validate the market to make sure that I'm building the right product?
I think definitely doing some research and understanding the market. I think it is invalid talking to potential users. You can get so much from them, and then it's really about what's the easiest way to start testing some of those assumptions. Now, a lot of that can be done without building a tech product, through interviews, through drawing out some paper prototypes. Even it doesn't have to cost a lot of money to validate some of those assumptions, but really understanding your users, their needs, what their problems are, what good might look like for them. Then you can build out potentially some personas, which will help you think about the groups of customers that you might target. So you talked about B2B there. It's like, what does a business customer look like? What kind of attributes do they have? What the problems do they have? How can you test and learn what a product might look like for them? And then lightweight prototyping as well. You can get a lot from observing people interacting with a prototype in terms of how that product might work. And anything that you can do around kind of low code as well to kind of quickly get something up and running, to get a beta group on. So, you know, a group of trusted users to start using your product. And all of that can be done without a big technical team, without, you know, a third-party agency who's charging you a lot of money. I think it's important to get some advice if you're even if you're a technical founder and you don't really have the product development knowledge in terms of how you bring a product to market. I think it's important to get that advice. And then if you're a non-technical founder, that you might have more of the product development and the idea side of things, but getting some advice in terms of how can you actually incrementally build that out? What are the kind of skills that you need? What are all the considerations that isn't just about building code, you know, the technical build, which I think non-technical founders often don't see or understand the value of making sure that you're looking at test automation, you know, how you're getting, making sure that your code is stored in a code repository safely, that your data is secure, that you've got the right access rights, that you own the IP. You know, there's quite a lot of those things that as a non-technical or even a technical founder who's not been through that process before, there's probably a list of things that it's important to make sure that you're considering, even in your really first early builds. And I think that can save a lot of time later on. But again, important that you do like just enough. You obviously don't want to over-engineer anything security-wise if you're only working with a test group of 20 users, for example. Yes. So it's all around that risk and trade-off as well in terms of what you want to do. That journey, especially moving towards that journey of funding as well, because I think your investors will be asking around a lot of those things around who your team are. You know, have you got a CTO or at least some kind of technical product advisor that's helping you? How much documentation have you got? Do you own the IP? Code quality in terms of, you know, automated testing, CI/CD. Is it in the cloud? Do you understand scaling? There's lots of different questions. I think that it's important to ask yourself as a new founder, or especially if you're working with a third party, to make sure that you're a little bit more in control of some of that stuff and you understand it as well.
Exactly. And I think this is really why it's important that, you know, we don't really want to scare you right now. But one of the things that is really important, as Anna just said, it's, you know, even if you don't know all of the answers to all of that to begin with, then start with a checklist. Start with something that you can take to whoever is your CTO advisor or your tech lead, and really think about how you will prioritize getting the answers to these questions. These are questions that will come up time and time again when you are starting to approach larger organizations, especially if you're talking SaaS businesses, we're talking integrations, or also when we're looking at funding. Now, a couple of great things I also really want to emphasize based on Anna, what you said, is that there are so many tools out there that allows you to create a proof of concept that you can quickly go to markets with to start testing, especially when we start looking at no code. When we bring no code on, one of the things that is also worth bearing in mind, that you still need to document exactly the same as if you were using code. A lot of the things that I see a lot, people write no code platforms without thinking a little bit about the architecture, how they've built it, and how eventually becomes a bigger headache to them in the future. And more importantly, they might not have set expectations to their teams or the investors that they might have to rebuild in the future. And I don't know if this is something that, you know, in your travels you've come across or you heard that it's becoming a bit more of a problem, the fact that there is a recognition, there's a strong space for no code. At the same time, there's a bit of a watch out, especially as you are maturing to the point of getting investments.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to highlight. I think all of these tools can maybe help you more quickly without, you know, in-depth technical resource, build out a tech product to start testing. But you have to be really clear if that is throwaway, and and the expectation around how much of it you would be able to scale, keep, reuse as you grow as a as a business. So for example, if you were looking at building out like a bit of an alpha platform per se, where you just want to kind of test out whether things are going to work okay, maybe test out some financial or commercial models on it, then that might be okay to quickly get something up within 3 months to demonstrate it out. But I think for investors and as the company grows, you have to manage those expectations around how much of that can be reused. You know, are you expecting it to be throwaway, and really communicating that from the start as well? Because I think there's a propensity otherwise to get yourself into a little bit of a corner, that you scale on a platform that you can only go so far, and then you will have to have potentially a rebuild or incrementally move away from that platform at some point, which might involve slowing down new feature development. It might involve having to get an internal team or find a new partner at a later stage. Whereas potentially if you're early on using, building something from a code perspective, using well-known technologies where it can be abstracted, API connections, a front end that can be reusable in React or something, can be a lot more flexible in terms of how you grow that out and manage that, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really important to always be upfront and honest, in your approach. And again, if you don't, again, go back to the point of this show, it's really about pushing people to think about not being scared of what you don't know, or being overwhelmed about the amount of things that you think, oh my God, I never really thought about that. But it's about making sure that you have the answers, or that eventually I will need to kind of think about that, and how do we keep that in mind in our risk assessment, or as in the list of questions that we will go and answer as we evolve.
Yeah.
Now, we are going to play a short game that are called quickfire questions, just to find out a little bit more about you, and also kind of get some other goodies. This is something that I don't really tell the guests, and it's a new segment that I've introduced recently.
Okay.
So, like I said, there's no right or wrong, but we might get to find out a little bit more about you and also about your journey. So the first question is always the most difficult one. Are you an early bird or a night owl?
I'm definitely a night owl. Not a difficult question for me at all. So my daughter's just gone back to school today, so it's back up early, and that was it's been a struggle already, day one.
Yeah, yeah, that's quite interesting. Next question. What can you name 3 of your favorite tools that you use? It could be from your personal or your professional life.
3 tools. Miro, not sure how people pronounce it, but that is like one of my favorite tools. There's so many things that I just love running off the boards on that one. So that's obviously a collaboration type, whiteboard type tool. What else? I guess the whole Google suite. I'm an Android fan, so using all of that in terms of things that I do. And then Calendly, I think, is another great tool that has been saving me so much time since I've moved to more of a consultancy model and mentoring, when you're trying to manage all your different appointments and times and video calls. So yeah, I love that.
I would imagine what life would be running your own business without Calendly or the likes. I use an app called MeetFox, but it's exactly the same model. And as you said, without that, I think I would be completely lost. So, what mistakes that you've made that founders should watch out for?
Okay, mistakes. So I think there's a couple of things. I think not documenting it. You touched on it before, but not documenting anything at all in terms of how your product is built out and how that's developed. I think that I've had a couple of situations where, as the business has scaled and we're looking to get investment or bigger customers, to not have that kind of well documented processes, ways of working, and kind of product understanding of how the product works in terms of well documented code has cost us quite a lot of time in terms of having to go back and look at things. I think another thing is not thinking enough about the security considerations early enough in terms of understanding, oh, we've got customer data, even if it's only a small amount, you're capturing someone's email address, you need to start thinking about where that's stored, the considerations around that side of things. And I guess another one was around making sure that you are looking at the costs of your cloud setup from the start, because I think if you scale very quickly and it's not optimized, or you can't see the cost, so at least you can check in and look at optimizing your architecture or infrastructure as you go. The costs as you scale, if you're scaling very quickly, maybe it might even be one large corporate customer, but the amount of capacity that adds through your, whether it's your processing or your storage, can just massively spike your infrastructure for your cloud side of things, or the services that you use that manage or store your data.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And actually get back to some of the things that you've mentioned there, is it's aligned with the question that was submitted by someone on LinkedIn that they wanted us to pose during this interview.
So the last question, just one more. Yeah, can I just add one more to that?
Go for it.
Automated testing. So I think that's another one in terms of, I would always advocate that when you're starting to build out a new product now, is to try as much as possible to do it test driven. Make sure you've got unit tests, system tests and test automation as you go, because I think trying to retrofit a lot of that, and sometimes it can't be done because the way you've designed or built the code isn't abstracted enough, isn't dynamic enough to be able to be automatically tested. So sometimes you have to refactor a lot to get testing in, but that whole change and deploy process is so much easier when you can run a suite of tests and you can see if you're breaking anything else as you change and manage the code, especially if you want to move fast as well, in terms of you want to manage that feedback loop from your customers and incrementally add things on. You can and not have to have a big team of testers that are working in a silo at the end of a development cycle, and actually have a lot of the bulk of that taken up by automated testing. I just think if you start that early, you build it with test-driven development, that way it can save you so much time and just make your change process so much more flexible for scaling.
And on behalf of all of the testers out there, I thank you, Anna, because this is one of the things that is quite challenging when it comes to startups and the way we run. First of all, another reason why I believe that automated testing is really important is also, let's face it, depending on how you are growing, the people who built the first platform might not be the one that have to maintain it or to scale it. So if you do not have automated testing, there will be some dark areas that they might not even know that someone had this crazy idea about doing X, Y, Z, or they did certain things. And because they knew the code base from inside out, they might not test that particular path, and that will create a lot of headaches for you in the future. And the second thing as well is, just because of the nature of startups, it's always fast. Of course, there's we implement strategies to manage the fast growth or even the fast development cycle. There's no point trying to say that we build it and we'll come back and write tests, because it's very, very hard trying to get development cycle that's only focused on writing tests that should have been written before. And it's actually much easier from a technical perspective in terms of convincing management to do it as part of the work and actually assign a workload to that. Because this is something that I faced, not just even before I started working with startups. The moment you go to management and says, we need, our test base is awful, we need to really invest time into doing that, all they see is investing money and time, not in building new features, and they question that. So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
really glad that you've mentioned the automated test here.
Yeah, I think it's especially important if you're working maybe with third parties or a digital agency, because often, you could, as a founder, you could see it as an inflation of the cost, because they are, agencies often want to include automated testing as much as possible. They want to give you a product to manage that's easy as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But it can also be something that, if you're looking at, you've only got a certain budget, that people try and carve off and go, okay, well, if we take the testing off, will we be able to get the product for less, without realizing the impact of that from a maintainability, speed of change, future proofing type piece. So I'm just a real advocate for it.
Yes, definitely. Another great thing that you've mentioned was on the security and being aware of some of the security and the impact in the scalability as well, because sometimes people think I've only got one client, especially when we start talking about SaaS and onboarding large customers. You might have one client, but that one client has many seats if it's a very large company, and that's an issue that a lot of people don't think about when they start approaching large companies. In fact, there was one question that came up, and I'd love to get your thoughts on that, Anna. I'll put it up on the screen. Are there any scalability challenges we need to anticipate as our user base grows, and how can we overcome them as a team?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a lot of things. I mean, I guess we touched on around kind of larger, working with larger customers, and that often brings a lot of scale with it and can often be quite quick as well, in terms of a lot of scale coming at once. I think you need to make sure from a security perspective that you are thinking about how you can incrementally improve your security side of things. If you've got quite a small database, you might have all your data in one table, for example. If you're looking at scaling, you need to be starting to abstract things out a little bit. Try and move things out into different tables that have services, so that you are starting to grow different elements of your product as you scale, and you're not building out a monolith, I guess, that's very hard to change or potentially swap out services. So, for example, you might decide that in the very short term, using something like Calendly, because you're booking appointments through your new product, you're using a third-party service, and that's great. But you'll get to a point where that maybe doesn't do everything that you need it to do, and you need to put more scale through it, different kind of features. You want to be able to then build and integrate your own product features as you go. So having things abstracted is really important. And then I think being able to grow your teams around that as well, so that they've got all the right tooling to be able to work around different areas of your product as you scale. Separating, normally starting a very small team, a unit of delivery that has your engineers, product, QA, representation, business in there. How do you start to kind of move into 2 teams, 3 teams as you grow and scale? And how do you grow the infrastructure? How do you map and plan out the product outcomes as well, so that you can start working towards an outcome-based product roadmap, which I think is really beneficial, rather than here's a list of all the things that we want to build. What are the problems that we want to solve? And as you get closer to the point where you want to start them, how do you break them down, start discovering those, and then get different teams working on those without having too much crossover in terms of working on one code base, for example. Having 7 or 8 people working on one code base can be really hard, and that's not even a big number. But if you've got it abstracted, there's different services, API endpoints, databases, applications potentially, then that means you can scale your team around that a lot. And then that's where obviously CI, CD, automate testing comes into play as well, because as the team grows, you've got that tooling as well that makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, and I guess it's all about building a strong foundation before you even start, so that you have all of the different rooms, even if they're connected by doors, but they are isolated in some ways, so that the team can grow and work independently from each other. Now, one thing, as we're looking into this area of large customers, another issue that people have is going back to the I don't know what I don't know is, what should I worry about when I approach or I start working with a large customer, bearing in mind that I'm a early stage pre-seed. So my platform doesn't have all of the bells and whistles that they might be used to. So how do you navigate those kind of conversations and discussions to kind of give founders a little bit more confidence in what they have to go out there and pitch, and not just that, but to also start working and onboarding clients on their platform?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've had a couple of times now where I've worked for pre-seed startups, and we've got a really big corporate customer who's really interesting. It's super exciting when you're that size, and you think this is going to be the customer that's going to springboard us, right through to Series A. But in reality, they have really long sales cycles. That's the first thing that I learned in terms of the actual sales cycle of, we've got this amazing new corporate customer, to actually then, it was probably almost a year and a half before we finally onboarded them. And I think that was because we were, as a newer business, they want to try and get a little bit more certainty from you before just signing up. So they often want a pilot, some kind of pilot type program. They often want some kind of customization. I think their expectations around security and their whole due diligence process as well can be very, very intense and quite daunting as someone who had never, the first time I went through that process, because you have to speak to, you might speak to their sales team, their pre-sales, their account team, then you might the procurement, their security, their data. They might have a different data team. So there's all these different teams who all need different bits of information, especially from a security and compliance perspective. But there were ways through it in terms of how can you get something lightweight, that is realistic for the size of your organization. And I think you have to develop honest and quite transparent relationships with them about where your business is, because as a small company of 5, for example, for you to have to spend up to 20, 50 grand on some security provisions to get that customer, it can make it obviously not viable at all. So looking at what are the lightweight provisions that you can do to be able to tick off their security questions. And a lot of it can be about policies, process, educating people, making sure that, simple things like you've got all the right access rights and that your data, your AWS settings are all correct. It can be quite simple things, but there can be a lot of it, like a lot of little things that you need to do to make sure. I think also from a support perspective, often they want SLAs, which is something that it was, the first, you're a team of 3 in a tech team and they want support, 8 till 8 or even later. That kind of thing can be a bit difficult to manage. But then it's all about that trade-off in helping them understand, well, we could do email support, or actually for the pilot, let's do office hours support side of things. What else was there? Payment terms can be a lot longer as well with the larger customers. They often want a dedicated account team or technical contact as well. So yeah, lots of different things, but I think it's that the level of expectation can be a lot higher because they're potentially used to working with businesses that are more mature in terms of their setup. But I think if they're interested in working with you, it's because you have something within the product that they don't necessarily have. And I think you have to gain their trust in terms of having a very tight relationship and help them understand your product roadmap as well, in terms of how you're going to incrementally develop that product. And maybe as a larger customer, they could be the test bed and the early adopter for a lot of those features. So from a time frame perspective, you know, it could be a short time frame to wait for the features that they want. Also, as well, sometimes there might be an expectation around integrations to other products and into their platforms and stuff. And sometimes that was something that we were able to negotiate for them to actually contribute towards the integration, so that we could get some API developers in to actually speed up that as well. So yeah, it was a really interesting process to go through. Year and a half, I think, the first one that I did, and I don't think that's uncommon. But I mean, we're talking about very large corporates where there's 7 or 8 different teams that you're involved in, and the due diligence, the security piece, was the largest. But I mean, what I did in one of my first roles, where I didn't have a lot of security experience, is I actually worked with a third party to support me on that. It's that, you know, where you don't have the right skill set, actually spending, I think it was a couple of K at the time, to get someone to support us through that process was, you know, really valuable.
Yeah, and as you can see, for those who are listening, there is just a huge amount of different skill sets that goes into not just building the platform, but also a huge amount of detail, because everything that we're talking about is not necessarily coding per se or tech. There's also the processes, there's the legal, there's the payments, and so much more. And in fact, one of the things that Anna, you've mentioned is the pilots. And if anyone who's at the point where they are thinking about putting together a pilot and they're not sure, then please do check one of the episodes on our podcast channel where we talked in length about setting up pilots for when approaching large organization, or even SaaS in general. It doesn't have to be large, but that's definitely something that can be an opportunity for you to test your processes and your work, the way you work. And again, Anna mentioned SLA, service level agreements, and that's also a way of testing how robust your support is and how many people you might need if, you know, once you start rolling this out to everybody out there. So if you cannot find the video, please let me know and we will I'll share the link with you. Find me on LinkedIn or the likes.
Another consideration I just thought about is, like, when working with larger customers, I've had it before where it's gone quite quickly to from like a smaller pilot that's UK based to, oh, we love this, that's great, let's try it in Europe, let's try it in America. And then from a product roadmap perspective, you're like, oh, all right, it's not fully internationalized. You know, we don't have euros on the site, we can't change the languages yet. So some of these things, I think, if you're thinking global sooner sometimes, or creating a product that, you know, you're not blocking yourself from internationalization or other things that come with that kind of scale.
That is super valuable to mention, because it's kind of take me back to something you said earlier about outcome-based roadmap. And once you start working with clients, you also need to bear in mind that they will come with their agendas. And if yours and theirs do not match, that could become a bit of a nightmare going forward, and also might want you to move forward in that direction that you might not want to. So that's why it's really important to know the parameters, and also as part of your risk assessment, what if the situation happened? How could we deal with that? Because in a way, it's actually a great outcome. I mean, if you're working with a client that says, oh, I love your product so much that I want to share it with the rest of the world, that's great. But if it means that it's going to put you in a position where your performance might kind of be downgraded, or your support lines are called all the time because of issues and languages, currency, and the likes, what is the impact on your credibility and approaching other startups in the future.
Yeah.
Bearing all of this in mind, especially when you start looking at the time it takes to even start working with large organizations, is it worth it going directly for large SaaS organizations, or maybe aiming for a small, medium to begin with is actually a better way of moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I would always have loved to go more for small, medium, I think, customers, in terms of that knits quite nicely with incrementally increase your scale, incremental product development, owning your own roadmap as well. I think having more customers that are subscribing to your product and your product direction or strategy, because that values them, rather than having one or two larger clients who are pulling more towards the bespoke, we need you to do this. You can fall into that trap of becoming a bit of a creating different versions of things for those bigger customers as well. I think when I was working for a company, hiring hub in Manchester, we were lucky enough that we kind of progressed both. And so we had the smaller, medium-sized customers who would very easily sign up for our SaaS product. Meanwhile, in the background, we were doing everything to get a larger customer on board. And actually, because of some of the sales cycles, we'd actually managed to do a lot of the technical things that they needed us to do by the time the contract actually started. So if you can move fast and you're nimble and you've got enough capacity, and it's in the same direction that you want to go, or roughly go in as an organization, then sometimes you can beat a corporate customer to signing that contract and actually onboarding.
Yeah. And in fact, as you're talking, another thing that popped into my mind, as you've mentioned, whilst you are within the sales cycle, can you move further ahead with the platform as well? So at least by the time you get to the end, you have something that has a little bit more features than before. One other thing to bear in mind is when integrations can be a blessing and a pain in disguise when it comes to working with large customers, especially if this is a feature that they really rely on. One of the things that I've seen is companies or startups going out there and really pushing the idea of integrating, because of course it's the easiest way of making sure that we have the base of data shared between the two companies. But at the same time, one of the things that you might not be aware of is that to integrate with another platform, it depends on the company that you're going to and how they build their systems, and whether they will also need development time to integrate with you. And that could also throw off your own projections, your sales cycle, and the likes. And do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think integrations, like you say, they can add a lot of value. They can bring a lot of custom to your platform as well. The more integrations you potentially have, the more kind of customers you can get from your integration partners as well, which can be great. But I think if you are going with an integration strategy, then it's important to have an integration team potentially, and maybe it's slightly separate from some of your other product development work, so that you actually have some integration experts who, because it's not just about building the integration, it's about the whole relationship part of that, understanding how you map the data side of things. There's the ongoing maintenance in terms of changes at either end as well, to make sure that you can keep integrations working. So yeah, it definitely needs some kind of focused attention if you're going down an integration type strategy. But yeah, it can be very valuable as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Anna, for talking to us about these wonderful topics. And I'm sure that, we can stay on the show for another hour or another couple of hours. There'll still be a lot more to think about. As we've mentioned to our audience, this is not to scare you. And in fact, is to help you strengthen your startup, make sure that you are aware of other unknown, so that when you are planning your roadmap, planning how you are approaching organizations or investors, what are the things to bear in mind, and how you can start working with that in a team. And for anybody who might still have some question or things that they want us to look into, do remember that the last Friday of every month, we do run free one-to-one mentoring sessions, and we also bring lovely mentors and connect you with other mentors. And I'm trying to strong arm Anna one of these days to join us in the future as well, because I think she has a lot of value. And as you've seen and heard, with her 20 plus years experience in the tech world, is someone that you definitely should need to go to if you have any headaches and you also are thinking about bringing a fractional CTO in your organization. Now, before we go, Anna, one last question about the world of startups. Why did you jump into this world, which can be messy at the same time, which I also believe that is quite exhilarating at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, I think before jumping into my first CTO role at a startup, I'd been in larger organizations for 6 years before that. And I think there's that sphere of influence that you get to. You know, you can't see the impact every day of everything that you're doing as much as you'd like to. So for me, it's really, you know, working with founders and tech teams in terms of helping them realize the product vision, but helping them, you know, having that excitement, that ability to change, to test and learn, to build out businesses and great products, but more importantly, like products that solve real problems. You know, I think my passion now is I'm working for a lot of kind of tech for good or really value kind of personal purpose type organizations. She is Action is a specific one where we're looking at building a platform to really change the future of women's sports and how, you know, create a community platform that can stop or can remove a lot of the blockers that can stop, you know, every, you know, women getting into sport if they want to. And then a mental health platform as well. So I think being able to create businesses that solve real problems and have impact is something that's really exciting around startups. But yeah, it's great working with really passionate people who have vision and able to innovate, less structure and governance, I guess. It's not too, I mean, you have to start thinking about some of that stuff, but it's not, you can change and build products out more easily, I think.
Yeah, you can move faster by bringing together as well. And I guess with your experience of being in both worlds, you can adapt or tailor some of the key processes that still is needed. You know, as you've talked about, you know, like automated testing, CI/CD, and so many of the other concept that large organization will do naturally and probably have the budget to buy all of the tools they need. But then how do you retrofit that and start small in a startup by having this kind of governance and also eventually start scaling, which I guess with your experience is something that you probably can do in your sleep as well.
Yeah, and it works both ways as well. You know, there's a lot of stuff from the larger organizations you can take back to startups in terms of let's just start thinking about that. You don't have to do anything yet. But then there's a lot of things from kind of startup experience you can take back to corporates. And another side of coaching that I do is actually in larger organizations with teams to try and get more of a startup feel and dynamic about how they deliver their products and more kind of product development thinking rather than big project thinking.
I'm glad you've mentioned that, because this is something that I'm seeing a lot, as especially in Madrid, because obviously I live in Cambridge and then sometime in Madrid as well. And I've been approached by a couple of organizations here in Madrid that are interested in this idea of how can we move faster so that we can also innovate within your organization. Because of course, post-COVID, there's a lot of companies that were already digital, but maybe they were not really taking into account other technology that they can bring into the way they work to allow more flexibility, remote working, a bit of AI, and all of those amazing tools that are currently being done. But it requires a completely different way of thinking in terms of the organization, a completely different way of building their internal tools and platforms. So yes, I'm quite excited that large organizations are also looking at the startup world, and I'll be speaking about those kind of things in Madrid and also in New York, where I focus more on the team side. But yeah, I think it's exciting that people are also paying attention, and there's something that our ecosystem can bring to the large organizations.
Yeah, definitely.
So for anyone who's have any question, or they want to find out, and they absolutely love this discussion and they want to discover a bit more about you, Anna, where should they go?
I think if you go to LinkedIn, that's probably the easiest place. So Anna Dick on LinkedIn, fractional CTO, coach and mentor. So mainly working with startups, but like I said, I've also been doing some coaching with some corporate customers as well. Also some mentoring for aspiring CTOs. So within a startup world, often a developer or a senior developer, has kind of done a lot of the original build, but hasn't necessarily had the experience of moving into that CTO role and a lot of the elements that we've talked about today. So that's another area that I'm finding really rewarding actually as well, is working with senior engineers, heads of developments, in terms of helping them bridge that gap to become CTO for their startups, which is great.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks, Anna, and thanks you all for watching. Remember that we do have our one-to-one mentoring at the end of the month. And if you have any other questions, if this episode has inspired new ideas that you want to discuss with us, you know where to find me. And with Anna, do please find her on LinkedIn. Her content is amazing and quite inspirational, and I'm sure she'll be able to make time to answer and help you on your journey to being the best platforms out there. And in the meantime, do remember, let's design a happy and productive workplace playground together.